What I want to begin with is an explanation of a little bit about the linguistic components of what we're doing here on this program. Something I point out on the weight loss workshops is the stuff that's hidden in plain sight, that once we draw attention to it, it becomes so obvious. Now, throughout this program, I'm going to be hopefully showing you some of these obvious things that when I point them out, you go, oh, I see. Now, here's one. It's quite a big area, in fact, and it's the thing of linguistics and how language reflects our mental processing and how mental processing affects our language. There's kind of this recursive relationship. I'm not entirely sure if it's a chicken and egg situation. I think they both happen at the same time. Now, here's the thing to be aware of. It appears, certainly in language and how we communicate about some concepts, that there's a relationship between how we process information and how we process food. And if you listen to the idioms and the metaphors that people have around information processing and food processing, there's a huge parallel and overlap between them. For example, we can talk about a news feed. We feed people information. So we can feed people the news, we feed them information in the same way that we feed people food. Some people like their information broken down into bite-sized chunks. Some people will bite off more than they can chew around information and situations. Some people have to be spoon-fed information. Other people will say, I don't want that. I don't want you forcing your ideas down my throat. There's also the word gullible. Gullible comes from the Old English word gull, which means a fool, but also means to swallow. I can't believe he swallowed that. He's so gullible. He fell for it hook, line, and sinker, so invoking fishing. So there's a lot of idioms and metaphors around information processing that are also effectively digestion metaphors or food metaphors. I've got more on my plate than I can handle. She's a bit of a dish. We talk about people's tastes. So the preferences that we have is in good taste or bad taste. This is because there's a part of the brain, the hypothalamus, which is heavily involved in the drives, which is also heavily involved with appetite and appetite regulation. If you affect certain parts of this brain, and there's going to be another section on the neurological bits just to go in depth, but you can profoundly affect how people know when to stop eating or how people know when to start eating. But here's the thing. If I take my information in bite-sized chunks, what does that prime me to do when it comes to taking in food? If I take in food in small pieces at a time, how does that prime me for taking in other stuff into my bodily system? Because if we start to think of ourselves as a system of which stuff goes in and stuff comes out, we can put food in, we can put information in, and there's stuff that comes out. But here's the weirdest thing, and I observed this in working with anorexics. One of the jobs that I used to do it's called specialist nursing. So I was the guy working for an agency who would go and do one-to-one nursing care on a hospital ward somewhere that required the extra input. Now, because of my interests, of course, I generally worked with people who had psychiatric or psychological problems. So one of the things I would do is I would often be asked to go and basically sit by the bed of an anorexic who'd have all the tubes and drips and stuff going in because they were at the final stages. You turn your back for 1 second, those tubes get ripped out. But there was this kind of complete refusal to accept food. There's also this complete refusal to accept information that's different to the system of information that they've got organized. So I would see staff hold up the mirror, go, look in the mirror, can't you see you're skinny, you're going to die? And they go, no, I'm still fat. People would show them photographs from their childhood. They would basically do anything in desperation to try and get something across, to try and get some information into the bodily system of the patient. But there was this complete refusal. It appeared to me that the anorexics were refusing food in the same way they refused information. Meanwhile, there's my clinical experience in working with people with bulimia. Now, there's an interesting thing about bulimics, because when I first started as a therapist, people would say to me, be careful about working with bulimics because they're the hardest client group to work with. And I hear that about most client groups, it seems. Now, the first bulimic I worked with, she was amazing. She came along, she made me feel at ease. She made me feel at ease, because I was just starting out. She was very, very receptive. She seemed to take everything in. In fact, she was the perfect client. I couldn't have wished for a better client, especially in the early days. But of course, what happens, I didn't know this at the time, is they do take everything in. But the moment they're gone, the first thing they do is basically spew it all back out again. They're taking the information in, but they're not actually retaining it or assimilating it into their body, into their bodily system. It comes in, it just kind of is a temporary thing there, and then it comes back out again. Or they could take laxatives or do whatever else to basically to flush it through their body as quickly as possible, and then revert back to what they normally do, which is of course very similar to what they do with food. In fact, it's the same thing. So there's this kind of weird relationship, and even if it's not true 100% of the time, it's certainly there inside the language, and it's one of those things that's there it's in plain sight, but it's very, very easy to miss. There's a PDF below here, by the way, where I've listed out as many of these idioms and metaphors of information processing that I can think of. If you've got any more, of course, add them in the comment section below. But start to think about how do you prefer to process information? So what I want you to do is to start to pay attention to this kind of elusive, obvious aspects of language, and start to think about how do you process information? Are you somebody who likes to go in depth into information, where you go through all the details and you pay attention to those things? Do you just take the whole picture? Are you the person that reads the headline, for example? Here's an idea that I have. When some people watch the 6 o'clock news, they might watch the entire 25 minutes, 30 minutes of the news. How many details are remembered from the news, or do they just get this overall impression? Whereas there's other people who will remember the specific details of specific stories. Are you somebody who has to have constant information coming in? Are you somebody who basically is very, very selective over the source of the information that you get, but also the style of the information and what you choose to take into the body? Think about how that can correlate to food. For some people, they will just basically eat anything. They'll take everything in. Other people are highly, highly selective. Do you have a relationship between those two things? And if so, what is that relationship? Again, let us know in the comment section. But other things, just start to think about, are you somebody who retains information? And how do you retain the information? So if information comes in, do you just retain it, or do you process it? Here's an example. Some people will be able to watch the news and they take it all in, and they can recite word for word pretty much what was said. But can they process that information, apply it to different areas, and actually have an understanding of what it is they're saying, or can they just merely recite the words that they heard? Other people can take in tiniest pieces of information and big pieces of information and process that, find application for it, and do stuff with it at quite a high speed. Most of us are somewhere between the two. How do you process information? What do you do with information? But here's the other thing, just to add into this mix here. What is the style of information? What is the form of the information that you prefer? For example, some people really like their facts and figures. The emotional stuff they have no interest in. It's all about facts and figures. You know these people because you come back from holiday and you've had a fantastic time, you've met great people, you had a real adventure and some fabulous evenings. But when you go and see that particular relative, they don't ask you about any of that. All they want to know is who did you fly with, how much did it cost, where did you stay, how long was the journey. And everything else is largely irrelevant to them. They just want the facts and figures that are quantifiable. Meanwhile, there's other people who don't care about any of that stuff. And they're only interested in the emotional components of the information. How was it for you? Did you enjoy yourself? Was it great? Really? And how, tell me, what happened? What was it like? So they're very much in the emotional aspects of the information, not the facts and figures. Again, most people are somewhere between the two. What do you do with the information that you get taken in if it's emotional? What do you do with those facts and figures? So essentially, how do you take the information in? What do you do with it when you've got it? Again, in the section below, I'm going to be fascinated to go through this and see what other people come up with. And good luck with that, and I'll see you in the next video.